Hey folks, it's Nate. It's time I got back to the drawing board, and tonight we're back with the book club. We're talking about Hirohiko Araki's Manga in Theory and Practice. It's time for Chapter 5, and we're going to talk about art. He says art expresses everything, and pretty much sums up this chapter. He talks about a lot of different things, nothing super specific. I think if you're looking for a how-to book on the best ways to approach laying out and drafting and drawing your manga, this is not the chapter for you. But he talks about a lot of high-level theory. He starts by talking about art as your killer technique. Your foremost consideration, Araki says, is what kind of art you will draw. Art is the mangaka's killer technique. The interesting part is that the art doesn't necessarily have to be good. And he goes on to break down what he means by that. The must-haves of popular art: having a cohesive design, accurately depicting light, providing a sense of shape and space. Those are his 3 bullet points of well-regarded drawings. And then he gives some specifics of what that might entail. But his point is, later on, around 10 years ago, he says, when everyone was still reading manga on the trains, the popular manga were the ones which had that unique element in the artwork that let you tell at a single glance who drew it, even if you were standing 2 or 3 doors away from the reader. On the other hand, manga with an art style that blended in with the others tended to perform poorly in the reader's surveys. Now, again, you see Araki's bias towards a publication, a manga magazine coming through here. But I still think he has a really good point if you're looking to just publish a webcomic or crowdfund something. The more unique you look, the more you stand out from the crowd, the more likely people are to click on your project or on your ad banner or click through to your website. There's a lot of very samey looking art. Jim Lee had a huge influence on artists. So did people like Rob Liefeld, and you see a lot of people trying to imitate these art styles, but it can get very samey very quickly. So you really need to stand out. The two elements that Araki notes in your art are realism and signification. Signification is drawing an object in a way that is recognizable at a glance. He gives the example, Mickey Mouse. You make those 3 circles in that formation, everybody knows what it is. And then realism, self-explanatory. It looks like what it is in reality. Manga is a medium, and so is comics, I believe, where you need both. You need to draw pictures that balance these 2 elements, and how you do that is a big part of what is going to become the element, the core part of your style, what sets you apart from the pack. And he says, put it simply, the important parts need to be realistic and everything else doesn't. It seems pretty straightforward, but where you put the emphasis, what is important in your art is one of the things that will make you stand out. Maybe anatomy isn't super important so much as dynamism or a sense of action, a sense of flow. If you look at Narwhal, his art is not super realistic, but has great signification of movement, of flow, of rhythm almost, and a lot of work and effort and detail goes into that. And if you look at something like Ibai Canales, his art is defined a lot by posing, by shape, and so his characters have very realistic proportions. There's a lot of realistic layering of the clothing, things like that. But a lot of other details, buildings, cars, the background, maybe not so detailed. So I think, that's balancing those 2 is a big part of what's going to give you your distinctive style. Araki doesn't say that outright anywhere in here, but I think if you look at the difference between someone like John Malin and Ethan Van Sciver, you begin to see a little bit of how people choose to balance signification versus realism, and how that impacts their style and sets them apart from one another. The same if you were to compare Van Sciver or Malin against someone like Timothy Lim, who has a very different style by and large, even in something like Soul Finder, than either of those artists. Anyways, if you keep drawing the same things, you'll become outdated. I found this to be very true. You need to change what you're drawing. You need to draw new characters. You need to approach new challenges in drawing. If you do a lot of character drawing, switch to drawing vehicles and furniture and stuff like that to give yourself a change, and so you can develop. Learn the meaning of objects, he says. That's more about that's more about realism, I guess. Building up those basics that underpin your style. It's very hard to signify when there's no realism whatsoever. On the other hand, if you're drawing a cell phone, it's very easy to signify a cell phone. It's just some rectangles like this. More complex objects like a tree will take a lot of work to break down what each of the different shapes in a tree means, what it says about the tree. A leaf versus branches versus a trunk versus roots, things like that. And then he talks about some specific things he believes all artists need to get a handle on. He talks about the golden ratio, how it applies to designing faces, how to draw a posable person, and he refers to as a robot with moving joints. Aim for more than mimicry. This is something he talks about as regards to aping another style. So don't just be a Jim Lee knockoff. Take Jim Lee as a jumping off point and then make him really your own. How to draw guns is basically about really learning the workings and structure and significance of pieces and a thing you're drawing. He says, you can't mess with the parts of a gun without making people who know anything about a gun laugh at your drawing of a gun, and you don't want that. He talks about drawing fire, water, air, light, and stone. Skip that part. Don't censor me, YouTube. There was definitely some breasts there. Anyways, what I'm trying to say, he's trying to talk about here is the difficulties of amorphous things. Well, I guess stone isn't amorphous, but fire, water, air, light, and even he puts stone as drawing shadows, which is a very amorphous thing. So learning to do all those things will help improve your rendering. He also talks about paper is more important than the pen, and basically what he's trying to say is don't work in a medium that will give out on you, because he talks about the quality of paper if you have to erase a lot, or if you do multiple layers of inks and paints and watercolors or something like that. You want something that will hold up. Now that is applied to digital art, but he talks more about that later, so hold on to that thought. He's got some survival stuff, being told you're not a good artist. If you've read anything on being a professional artist, you've probably heard this stuff before. But he talks about finding his style. He talks about, what makes him distinctive is the posing of figures. That's something he acquired on his trip to Italy. And then he says, by amplifying the signification of poses to the extreme, you can achieve a form free of all extraneous elements, like with Myron's famous sculpture, Discobolus, which is an unusual, captivating, slightly bent over and angled pose of an Olympic athlete about to hurl a discus. Basically, he talks about his style as an expression of pose and sculpture and all the things he worked to amalgamate there. This is an interesting examination of how he arrived at his style. I don't know how useful it will be for people attempting to nail down their own style, but there it is. Make the invisible visible is something he talks about. He relates to music and how a score that is beautifully I will also create pleasing music. And then how you can relate that to things like supernatural powers, or even just communicating things like friendliness, using the examples of Mickey Mouse, Doraemon, and Pan-Man. Those last two are famous Japanese characters that are quite friendly, aimed at kids. And he talks about making supernatural powers visible with stands, which, if you're familiar with JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, is something he does in the later parts, and how he anthropomorphized his characters' powers to give them, make them more obvious and relatable to the readers. This is all interesting theory stuff. Whether, how much it will apply to you is, it depends on what you want to do, all things considered, I think. The Japanese mangaka Ogreto also does a lot of really great visual representations of the supernatural, or even just to give an impression of the danger or grandeur or impressive presence his characters project. And some of the things that Araki talks about here will probably be useful if you're looking to do something like that. He says, don't try and fake it. If you're not being enthusiastic, if you're not really invested in your art when you're working on it, your readers will know. Don't try and hoodwink readers. I think that's very important. I think a lot of artists, especially if they've been doing it for a long time, they can get kind of complacent. I've met some artists like that, and you can see it in their art. It's missing something, some intangible that you can notice when you look at their art. So it's best not to try and put that over on people. At the very least, admit maybe it's not the best work. Preserve a moment for eternity is all about making the emotional impact. You want to draw pictures that will stick with people. And that should be your goal with every piece of art, even though you're not going to achieve it with every piece of art. Finally, he talks about why he still works in analog. First and foremost, he says, the reason I still do everything on paper is that analog can't always be made digital, but digital can't go to being analog, and I figure if that's the case, then analog is superior. I don't know if I really buy that argument. But he does also say, when you draw by hand, it's like a live performance. When you make a mistake, you've made that mistake, and there's a limit to how much you can go back and undo it, especially when you're working in pens and inks. I think it's a lot more compelling. I think it does add an indescribable something to your art, sort of tension. It keeps you more focused and on point as compared to digital art. I've done a little bit of digital art. I've never been able to become an expert at it, really. But I do think you get more snap, sharper work in physical art. And so that's pretty much what he talks about in this chapter. There's very little through line. It's a lot of it's very tips and tricksy. It's not going to tell you how to build a page from the ground up or anything like that. If that's what you're hoping for, Araki's book is mostly not for you. He does have here at the end where he talks about script and the process, and then shows you an entire chapter he wrote and walks you through his thought process. I think that will be useful. But it's not like a complete, dummy's guide to, how to draw a manga and make the art look good. So if that's what you're hoping for, this book maybe isn't for you. But I think that there are enough ideas and basic theories floating around in here that I had never heard before, that you can benefit from picking it up and reading it. But again, it's not an art how-to. This is the only chapter that really delves into Araki's art processes and his thoughts. So if that's what you really want, don't get this book. Yeah, it's that simple. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, well, there's a like button and subscribe button down below. You can use them as you see fit. Let me know what you thought of the chapter in the comments down below, and I'll talk to you later.